Good evening, spiritual warriors. Welcome to Spiritual Warriorship, where we discuss, read, study books by His Holiness Bhakti Tirtha Swami. I was in this position last week, all ready to greet you, and bing, the lights went out. But it's been interesting. I remember thinking in my head, a phrase came to my mind, and I'll share it with you. But it was like all week, and Alfrenon would come, and I kept thinking, where did that come from? How did I get that? But it came to me tonight. Now, the phrase was this. Someone would say, where were you when the lights went out? And we would reply, in the dark. So I said I'd share that. But now I recall today what it was. During World War II, we used to have blackouts, for practice in case warplanes came over America, or some, checking where the lights were, where people were. So we would have these practice things, and all the lights would have to be out at a certain time. So that was the joke. Where were you when the lights went out? In the dark. So it wasn't quite dark here last week because there was still some daylight coming through the blinds. I was just a little disappointed to miss you. But guess what I did? I got ready and jumped in bed. I think my body was still trying to catch up with itself after the big installation. And I hope you've seen some of the pictures. I know on Facebook and on Krishna.com. There are quite a bit of pictures, and it was quite exciting welcoming Krishna Balaram to our new Raman Reti temple and community. So we're back together this evening. And it's interesting, I've been reading ahead where I'm going to read and what I want to share. And I'm having this realization of the potency of Bhakti Tirtha Swami, his writing and his effort to help us become spiritual warriors, knowing who we are as spiritual beings, and to become spiritual warriors, that I'm really quite thankful for having been in his experience, hearing him actually, and now reading his words to imbibe. And I'm sure all of you who are out there listening are serious about your spiritual life, because I'm sure there are many other things you could be doing on a Thursday night at 8 o'clock. But you've taken the time to come and tune in and go in the chat room and listen. And as I said, it just could be me, but I'm saying what's coming tonight, please listen, because he's taking us to levels that we need to go to be these warriors. We're in the book Spiritual Warrior 3, Solace for the Heart in Difficult Times. Wonderful subtitle, isn't it? And we're on the chapter, How to Strengthen Ourselves. And I'm sure those of you out there on a spiritual path, endeavoring to walk a spiritual path, endeavoring to be strong spiritual beings and to help others, because that's our role, really can use some strengthening at every moment. And I notice also as reading, it's like a guidebook, and yet his intention is that we are already on the path of spiritual warriorship, and he's now giving us guidelines and tools and methods. So But we say, let the program begin. Now, last week I was to start on page 209 with the section, The Value of Discernment. It's interesting. Last week I also had some questions for you. And this week I don't see them. But I'll have them and I'll throw them out at you. So you better listen. Everybody's having their final exams. But really, your final exam is in your consciousness, from your hearing, from your discussions. Are you passing the test? He told us we have to have tests to see if we're qualified to go back to the spiritual world. We have to have tests to see if we've understood what we're hearing and attempting to practice and live in our lives. Also, when we spoke of spiritual warriorship in the beginning, and we spoke of how he describes a true spiritual warrior strives to master weapons. And what are the weapons, he tells us? And hopefully you're finding these manifesting in your life more and more. The weapons of love, humility, compassion, faith, and self-knowledge. Now, on that point, I'm going to take you back to the 12 qualities of a spiritual warrior. If I'm not mistaken, I believe I began this series, Spiritual Worship, with them. And what it came to me today, and I don't know if I'll be able to follow through, because they're now, I believe, 58, what do you call them, archival programs in Krishna.com. How do you like the new Krishna.com? They've been working there for a while. We didn't think we could get on. We didn't know all this new mechanism, technology. But anyway, I'm thinking maybe I can make time and start going back and make a list of the number program and what I discuss, so that if I'm talking to you about the 12 qualities of a spiritual warrior, I could say you can go back to program 2, 3, 4. Now, as I say, that's an idea that came to me today, because I didn't really understand, I don't think, the importance and significance of what I was doing when I started. All I knew was I wanted to serve my Gurudev, and this was a way to do it. And I'm thankful because of that we've gone over a year. But as I see how he cross-references so many points, that as I come across, I'm thinking if I could direct you to a whole program where we discuss that specific point, then I don't have to feel sometimes as I do, I wish I could remember what I said. So I don't know. Think on that, or if any of you out there want to give a hand and do some service, maybe you could volunteer or consider going slowly through my past programs, and just because in the beginning I should say what I'm going to talk about that night. And then we'll know what book I'm in and all. Okay? You like that idea? All right. So, Spiritual Warrior 3, how to strengthen ourselves. And if you don't have the book, as I've said before, you can order it at Krishna.com, or you can order it through harinampress.org. If you go to harinampress.org, they're offering a free card, poster of the 12 qualities of a spiritual warrior. And there you can read excerpts from the books. So maybe you will be able to, catch up, because it'd be nice if you're following me. All right? So a reminder, as we said, we would say, that the spiritual warrior strives to master these weapons of love, humility, compassion, faith, and self-knowledge. And also that our battleground is the realm of consciousness, human consciousness. And if you've been following, you've been hearing him take us, after discussing different aspects, he takes us inside. We've got to go inside and see what's going on there so we can become purified. So a battlefield is consciousness, and what do we do on that battlefield? If our consciousness is right and we're helping others, then we can wage war against ignorance and lust and greed and all the things that the conditioned souls are suffering with. And then our objective in doing that is to try and bring about a civilization and environment where people live in harmony with each other and with God. So that's quite a responsibility on a spiritual warrior, but you're out there on the battlefield, and I'm so happy that you are. But he also reminded us that the path of a spiritual warrior is not an easy one. It's not la-di-da, oh, I'm hearing about spiritual warriorship and I got it made. It's not an easy path. He reminds us that it demands courage, determination, discipline, intense compassion, and unconditional love. Because what are we talking about? Changing consciousness, changing the environment that we're in. And that takes courage to begin to really become renewed and purified in this day and age. So it requires, though, an understanding that this world is not the end in the final chapter. We're working towards the cleansing, purifying, as I said, the tests are to see if we're qualified to get to the spiritual world, because we're told so often that Lord Krishna wants us more than we want him, and he wants us back more than we're willing to go. But those of us that are getting the study and are reading your Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, you're well on the way. So somehow I got carried away trying to make sure we're on. It must be, let's see what's coming up that got me so wound up. We left off in this chapter, we looked at the challenge of spiritual life. And then he also told us, gave us teachers, great teachers who were tested. So we're tested. Who do we think we are? If we look back in history and in scriptures, we'll see that great teachers. Jesus was tempted. Buddha, Saint Teresa of Avila, Francis of Assisi, Saint Thomas of Aquinas. So he shows us that tests in spiritual life is like a part of the process. And it's to help us find our weakest points so that we can become self-regulated and really ready for moving ahead. He reminded us to work on our consciousness. I hope you've been doing that since we discussed that. And then he also told us how to weed out the saboteurs of devotion. And he reminded us there that we cannot understand spiritual realities by scholarship alone. Yes, you read the books and you remember this and that. Although that study is important, the path to spiritual realization is through a dedicated, selfless service. It's about, we're all servants of God, and we practice that service through our lives. And as we offer service to others with no expectation of reward, the Lord in the heart becomes more available. And he provides for our needs, because we have removed the veils that hide the truth. Then he spoke of, I think we finished up with the section on self-protection, where he tells us as we purify our own consciousness and become more effective spiritual warriors. It's a process, becoming a strong spiritual warrior. We must keep in mind that we are in a wartime situation. And as in any wartime, soldiers must know how to protect themselves, huh? And here we're talking about the art of self-protection as an essential component of our inner work and our endeavor to serve others. Okay? And then I like this part. Today somebody was talking to me about, she was quite upset, just about the horrific things, for want of a better word, that's going on out there in the media, and the children with, their cell phones now and pornography. They're showing, putting pictures of themselves in all states and what's coming through. And she was really, and was talking about maybe, starting, and she mentioned Bhakti Swami's books, that maybe somebody can make a curriculum based on what these technologies, that tools that he's giving us, so we can help others. And it reminded me, as I had just read this section from Self-Protection, where he says our minds are extremely vulnerable to influences from media and the electronic devices that surround us. Self-protection for spiritual warriors involves being vigilant about the mind at all times. Huh? What's going on? What's it presenting to you? Be vigilant. And he also says we must be vigilant minimizing television viewing, excess computer work, and many other habits that lead to passivity, inertia, and mental absenteeism. You get sucked into that and you're just staring at it, and you're being carried to places that aren't profitable for your spiritual growth. So, as spiritual warriors, he tells us we must not forget the help we are constantly receiving from higher beings in this universe. So you're not alone as you're striving and endeavoring to fulfill, manifest these qualities he's talking about. At the same time, we must be aware of the tremendous influx of lower beings who are attempting to neutralize us by polluting our minds and hearts. Mindfulness is important. These harmful entities are always on the prowl for new victims and are continually seeking out ways to direct us towards darkness. But we as spiritual warriors, we've come into the light and we're going to be vigilant. Now, he talks about discernment to avoid herd mentality. Spiritual warriors, and every time you hear spiritual warriors, just sort of feel it, sit up straight. Yes, he's talking to me. I'm one of those. I'm a spiritual warrior. Prayerfully, you're imbibing that. Now they must learn, spiritual warriors must learn discriminating, to be discriminating. They must understand that the root cause of destructive behavior can generally be traced back to a common origin. And we talked about that a long time ago. Lust, common origin. Or the desire for sense gratification. Even those who start out with the best intentions can turn into abuses if they are attached to sense pleasures, because eventually they reach a point where they will stop at nothing to fulfill their insatiable desires. As spiritual warriors, I've decided every time I come across it, I'm going to raise my voice in case you're dozing or if your mind is taking you away for a moment. I'm going to remind you, this is spiritual warriorship we're involved in here, and he's giving it to us as each section. As spiritual warriors, we must, have you been noticing how he presents that to you? We must not allow this herd mentality to capture us. Instead, we must keep ourselves apart, ready to lead the herd as a result of our purity and commitment. Leaders, we must be ready and apart. A mother was telling me a situation this weekend that went by, and her daughter was here visiting from another state, and she's coming into into Krishna consciousness. And yet the weekend was busy, and the young folks were saying, "Come on, let's go hang out." And it's not easy to say no. That's not for me, You want to be with the others. So as spiritual warriors, though, we must not allow that herd mentality to capture us. When they say, "Come, let's go to the club," no, not this time. I think I'm finished with that right now. I'm going to go sing bhajans over here, So we must be ready to lead that herd when they come as a result of our purity. Now, for this, we must be able to resist our lower urges and guide others to genuine spiritual shelter. That's a difficult task, especially in a society that bombards us with temptations at every turn. Now, although these principles of discernment are simple to understand, because you're hearing them, "Oh yeah, I think I can do that," they are important because they have a deep impact on our ability to maintain our strength. And don't forget, this chapter is telling us how to strengthen ourselves. Now, we must resist the temptation to be, in quotes, normal. What you talking about? We must resist the temptation to be normal. He tells us because those who are now considered normal accept the values and practices of the insane world. In modern society, for example, normal people strive to accumulate as many commodities as possible because they believe that their success and personal worth are linked to the number of possessions they have acquired. He tells us, as the joke goes, the one who dies with the most toys wins. If we espouse this viewpoint, the toys we have to play with form the measure of our personal worth. Unfortunately, this notion confuses acquired material worth with our inherent worth as spiritual beings. As spiritual warriors, here he starts again, as spiritual warriors, we must go beyond this narrow conception of human life. This means that in every situation we must ask, why? How? And what will that lead to? We should constantly examine the ramifications of our thoughts and actions. We should constantly examine the ramifications of our thoughts and actions and seek to discover the laws behind them. He's mentioned a number of times, and I think he does again here, of how the Lord is in the heart. Bhagavad Gita, what is it? Is it 15:15? I'm in everybody's heart. If we imbibe that, get a sense of that, the Lord is in our heart, so our body is really a living temple, we will really examine what the ramification of our thoughts and actions are. Would this be pleasing to the Lord? Who's right here watching? Ultimately, he says, we will learn who the lawmaker is and how to be in harmony with his laws. We will discover that we do not want to be lawbreakers because we do not want to experience the painful consequences of our actions, especially when we violate spiritual principles. Now again, my mind takes me back. I can't remember word to word, but if you've been following us, remember the time we spent on reading about reincarnation and karma. If you imbibe that, understand that, then you would really be more, put more effort into constantly examining your thoughts and actions. Once you've gotten, you're getting knowledge, and you use that knowledge in your everyday life. So if we disobey material laws, we may get away with it for a time. But we are always caught when we break spiritual laws. Why? Because the Lord resides in the heart of each of us and is eternally aware of what we're doing. I'm just remembering with my children, I remember a nun said about my son, put the fear of God in him. But I had a sense of God being in our lives, and I used to tell him, I can't see everything you do, but God sees what you do, so don't think you're going to get away with anything. And I remember one time my oldest daughter said to me, if she bumped her toe, she wondered what she had done wrong. I hope I didn't make her completely paranoid. But truly, if we understand this, we will be more mindful and aware of what our thoughts and actions are. And that's what brings change in our environment, and people notice that there's something different about us. And then we won't be following the herd mentality. We would be the leader. Because some people, once they see how with this mindset you carry yourself, you speak differently, you're more respectful, and you don't put up with nonsense. And most people inside want to be that type of person. So he says, despite the materialistic focus of our modern society, growing numbers of people are becoming spiritually aware, seeking to understand the nature of reality and the purpose of human life. And I'm sure those of you who are reading and studying and following this ancient Vedic teaching, and when you talk to people and you just bring up some point about God that you know and have studied and are experiencing, they're ready to hear it. They're ready to hear it. Many have developed an awareness of spiritual principles and have had experiences that transcend the normal material consciousness. Hear that? Many have developed an awareness of spiritual principles and have had experiences that transcend the normal material consciousness. Because once you raise your mind and consciousness to a higher level, you, as he said here, we don't know how many entities are watching us or with us and protect. You're going to have different experiences than that so-called normal person who's chasing down commodities. And I'm glad I read that again, because that's what he's leading to and trying to bring us to clearer understanding in these next readings. So he says, such experiences, now we just talked about having developed an awareness of spiritual principle and have had experiences that transcend normal material consciousness. Such experiences can serve as catalysts for them to access a deeper level of spirituality, in which they can experience a dynamic, personal relationship with God and discover the joys of the higher, non-material realms of existence. Okay, spiritual warriors, yes.
There's a question from Chalice.
Who?
Someone named by Chalice.
Chalice? Okay, just tell me where you're from, Chalice, please. And what is the question?
Why are young people never ready to hear it? The truth and spiritual.
Why are young people never ready to hear it? Because young people think they're going to live forever. Young people think that they are the controller of everything, unless they have been getting some teaching, training, examples from young life. If a child is growing up in a home where these spiritual principles are being discussed and talked, and you're worshiping God and you're talking about God, and I remember even with my children, they had to respect each other in the home when they spoke, and there was certain I wouldn't even let one say shut up to the other. That wasn't allowed. Please be quiet, but not shut up. And certain street language was not allowed in the home. And as I said earlier, there was always a reminder that God was present and saw and heard everything they said. So I'm not saying they weren't mischievous in getting into things, but I'm thankful they never went wild out there. So young people, their training has to start young. They have to have examples of people who see God's work and see God's protection. And it isn't that everything is going to be good. Somebody will die. There's got to be death because we're in the material world. But it's how that's a part of the process of life. And there may be an accident, and someone may get hurt in an accident. You don't stop thinking about God. You see how you're to grow and learn from those particular things. So young people, also at a young age, it's about sense gratification. The senses are quite prominent. And that's why we went through quite a bit in Spiritual Warrior 2, transforming lust into love. Because most are really just looking for love. Mm-hmm. And unless there's some, again, proper guidance and instruction, love to them means sense gratification rather than knowing who we are and pleasing God and serving God. How does that help? Does that help you?
There's a discussion that young people in general are just not interested in religion. Shruti commented that some are followers of a very hateful fundamentalist brand of it.
Mm-hmm.
And Bhakti Carol says, like, her experience at the Rainbow Gatherings, that there were many young people into spirituality.
Mm-hmm.
And Bhuvan Mohan commented that he being an older person, he knows there are many older people who are not interested
In spiritual life. They're interested in sense gratification. And that's what Bhakti Tirtha Swami has been reminding us as we go along, because every single one of us are spiritual beings. We have a body, but we're not these bodies. And if you're reading Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, Krishna spells it out. So that spiritual essence within us, that eternality within us, that spark. And I forgot what chapter and verse, Krishna tells us that we are his eternal fragments. We're his parts and parcels. So that desire for spiritual awareness and spiritual life is essentially a part of all of us. But we're in the material world, in the world of duality. And as we just spoke about the media and what's being presented to us, so if we're not practicing discernment, which is judgment and understanding and seeing what's going on, so we can say, no, thank you, I know there's something more, and associating with people of like mind at a higher level, yes, it's going to be down. You're going to find that. But still, he tells us here right now that a number of people are becoming spiritually aware because people are suffering. The condition of this world today, some people are really becoming tired of it. And as we went through Spiritual Warrior 6 and we read about the different so-called religions and things, we saw how there are different sectarian and fanaticism out there. That's why if you're opening yourself for truth, it will find you and you will have it, but you have to practice it, you have to imbibe it in your life, you have to associate with people of like mind. Okay? Any other question?
No. Bhakti Shruti says the people in general are mostly not interested, but they can be made interested.
If we're examples, people, where did we read about? We spoke about idols. You know, everybody has idols and people that they look up to and like what they're doing, what they're wearing and all. If we as spiritual warriors become perfect examples of spiritual warriors with the weapons of love and humility and knowledge and compassion, and express this in our daily life, and as we are constantly aware of our thoughts, words, and actions and deeds, we'll be the examples. And people who want to, what's the word? Not imitate. There's another word. But besides imitate. Emulate, maybe. And that's why we're saying the battlefield is in consciousness. Can't go up to people and say, you must do this, you must do that. How? What? So why? But if they see you functioning at a level that internally they know they'd like to have those qualities and manifest that, and then they'll ask you, and then you can tell them in a compassionate way. So you be the example. Okay? The next, he talks about the impact of subtle phenomenon. as I said, these next sections, I don't know, I'm going to try and get through because it'll give you something to think about, watch for, and work with through the next week. And this is what we're about: hearing, imbibing, and putting into practice in our lives. Gurudev used to say, I'm not here to entertain you. I'm here hopefully to get your attention, to hear and begin to imbibe these thoughts and practices. For the most part, he tells us, our problems are far deeper than the obvious social evils of oppression, imperialism, nationalism, and even poverty. Many of our greatest complications exist on the subtle level. Spiritual warriors, in addition to being materially competent, should learn to master these subtle aspects of existence. We're not interested in skating over the surface of issues as the average materialist does. And again, goes back to where we read about working on our own consciousness. We must stop and examine what's going on inside of us, and what may be there that's making a blockage to us moving ahead. Spiritual warriors must be sensitive, alert, and meticulous in all their dealings if we are to make a positive contribution to the level of collective awareness. What must spiritual warriors do? Must be what? Sensitive, alert, and meticulous in all our dealings if we are to make a positive contribution to the level of collective awareness. We must be especially discerning in the area of our inner experiences. Many people engage in meditative practices that cause them to enter altered states of consciousness without proper guidance. However, the deeper levels of consciousness we reach through meditation can sometimes cause a lack of integration with our surroundings. Some of those who once practiced intensely in such areas as Kundalini Yoga, complicated breathing exercises, and other mystic disciplines without proper instruction and guidance are now in a mental institution because they became seriously unbalanced. So it's, again, giving us what we must be mindful of and aware. It's not just as somebody says, oh, this will make you spiritual, breathe like this and chant like this or say this mantra and you will. No, you must be mindful, alert, and meticulous. Others who divulged their visions to people who could not understand what was happening also became labeled as mentally ill. This mental state we considered negative and dangerous. And my mind is just going to those of us who are chanting the Maha Mantra and following the pastimes of Lord Chaitanya and different acharyas. They tell us, when they're chanting that holy name and you make connection with the name, what they fall on the ground, they roll in the dust, and their body hairs stand on end. These are phenomenons that can happen when we make connection with the highest. Because our bodies are not made, and even our minds cannot understand and deal with these higher phenomena. So if you are seriously into your spiritual life and you are seriously wanting to make connection with the Supreme Lord, that Lord in the heart, he's telling us that you must be alert and mindful. We must not forget the perspective of history here. Not long ago, many intuitive spiritual women and men in Europe and America were convicted of witchcraft, deprived of all their property, and tortured, hanged, or burned. Remember that Joan of Arc only became canonized saint several centuries after her burning at the stake. And this style of punishment was not unusual for the times. And he says, on the other side of the Atlantic, America experienced the sale of witch hunts and executions. So today, keeping these historical precedents in mind, we should always be truthful, but remain cautious about bearing our souls indiscriminately. He gives us more in this section of, again, we're spiritual warriors, strengthen ourselves. Another aspect of our environment that requires careful discernment is sound. Who we talk with, what we talk about, and what we hear. Even if we're not aware of it, sound vibrations have a powerful effect on us. For example, if we engage in frivolous, speculative, or gossipy conversation, we weaken our vital energy and interfere with our spiritual development. Such behavior causes us to become off balance and consequently makes us more open to attack. He's given it to us, devotees and non-devotees, whoever's hearing this. Again, we say there are no accidents, no coincidences. The Lord in the heart, knowing what we need to hear, when we need to hear it, what we need to do, has us in the right place at the right time for that. And all I'm saying, quiet your mind and just listen, make notes if you need, because these are some important points he's giving us as we endeavor to move along this path of spiritual warriorship. Remember,
There's
yes.
a question. Bhuvan Mohan asks, how can we keep ourselves mindful and not slip into a passive and spiritually vulnerable state while chanting the holy names?
We have to focus. We have to, when in Mastery of the Mind, he tells us how to explain to the mind that you're going to let the soul express itself. We have to master that mind and just tell it, listen to the holy name. We have to hear the holy name ourselves and just continually chant. Somebody was telling the story, Prabhupada devotee said, but Prabhupada, I can't do something. And then Prabhupada says, just chant. But Prabhupada, my mind, and he kept saying, just chant. So for right now, just chant. But hear it. Hear the word. I find what's happening with me, it's taking me a longer period of time. I'm trying not to get stuck on time because I am really pronouncing every word and endeavoring to hear the sound of every syllable of the Maha Mantra. And they say as you do that, you begin to get pictures of Krishna's pastimes and just bring that mind back when it wanders. I hope that's helpful. He tells us here, now we're dealing with sound vibration. We just dealt with a subtle phenomenon that may be going on this spiritual path. Remember, in one sense, the body is just a collection of vibrations. And it stands to reason that sound has an effect on matter. Instead of using drugs to numb their patients against pain, certain dentists use specific sound vibrations that alter consciousness to such an extent that medication is not necessary. As another example, researchers have discovered that different kinds of music either enhance plant growth or retard it. I think most of you know that. Plants thrive with classical music, but they can barely survive and even die when rock music is played around them regularly. Rock music also has a tremendous effect on the human chakras or energy centers. It can intensify lust and incite us to act in degrading ways. Generally, when we listen to this heavy music, we feel agitated, aggressive, lusty, egocentric, and animalistic because the music is intensifying these energies. That is why we must be attentive to the quality of sound that we allow in our environment. Sound can determine our level of consciousness, even when we're unaware of its influence. Now, I'm going to stop there because the next section talks about the dark night of the soul. And I feel we've covered quite a bit tonight. I want to hold your question. Those of you who are in the chat room or anybody that's been thinking of, to feed me back, if you don't mind, some aspect of instruction, method that he's given us this night that is helpful to you or you feel is helpful to you or that you would want to imply in your life or you have had an experience. Okay, yes, there's a question.
You spoke of karmic reaction.
Mm-hmm.
How are witch burnings and torment of other religious practitioners explained, thinking of karma and reactions?
Wait, say that again.
In relation to karma and reactions,
Mm-hmm.
how are witch burnings and torment of other religious practitioners explained?
Very good question. And at this point, I'm not sure where to go with that with you. When I spoke of karmic, and again, as we say, everything, what goes around comes around. But I was talking, he spent quite a bit of time telling us about karmic patterns, because again, karmic patterns can come from lifetimes of actions that bring about reactions. He tells us that our thoughts and actions may shape what we will become. And again, I think when we were reading Spiritual Warrior 6, and he brought out how in ancient time, the evil was over here and good was over here, and eventually they all came together in one. So we're going to have demonic people who may do demonic things and do them to people who maybe their purpose at that time is to receive that reaction so that that person will take that action and then get their reaction. I cannot go at this moment any deeper in answering that. But again, if we've studied and we're hearing, everything has a purpose. And what we're trying to do when we're talking about, and Bhakti Tirtha Swami is giving us, is endeavoring to end a cycle of our births and death and accumulation of karmic patterns so that we may get to a higher level and be able to end that cycle and become purified at this time. I don't know if anybody out there has any comment on that, but that's and who asked that question?
Bhakti and Carol.
Bhakti and Carol. That's your homework, Bhakti and Carol. Thank you for it.
And you were asking everyone to say a comment about what they've heard.
Tonight,
right?
Yes.
Bhuvan Mohan says, I need to remind myself of the seriousness of what I'm doing when I chant, or I very easily lapse into a passive state.
Okay.
And then Bhakti Kiro says, what was important for her was being careful of our environment. And then Bhuvan Mohan adds, I think proper diet and proper rest are important too. Bhakti Shruti says, being careful of the conditions we are placed in. And then Chalice has another question.
Okay.
Oh, what was important for him? Knowing when to say no, thank you to no thank you to friends when going out on weekends in an environment where there is alcohol and attitudes of others in mode of ignorance. Trying to avoid that environment altogether can help my spiritual progress.
And you can do that very compassionately. It doesn't have to be rough or raw or put down anybody. If that's where they are, that's where they are at this time. But that's not where you want to be. And you can very compassionately say no, or I have something else to do, and I just don't want to go that way at this time. And still be their friend because the Lord has a way of separating us from what's not best for us as long as we become serious. So yes, that's really good to consider that. And that's what he's telling us. We have to pay attention to our thoughts, our words, our actions. Anybody else?
Bhakti Shruti agrees.
Yeah. Okay. So, as I say, next week we want to begin with the dark night of the soul. Because if you're working on these things that we mentioned tonight, being observant of the sounds that you're hearing and the kind of talk you're talking, engaging in, you're making changes, occurring on subtle levels and higher levels. And he tells us you have to look out at what experiences are you having as you're beginning to change consciousness. And when the consciousness is changing, there's like a revolution going inside, and you really need to be mindful. And that's what he described. So try to make notes, because we're receiving some intense, I feel, understanding, on becoming spiritual warriors, understanding who we are as eternal spiritual beings, so that as we're studying our Bhagavad Gita and following Krishna's instructions and hearing Srimad Bhagavatam and endeavoring to follow in the Acharya's footsteps, we will have had these methodologies, tools that Bhakti-tirtha Swami is giving us to move through to higher levels. Because as spiritual warriors, we're understanding that this world is not the end of the line and we want to go further. So try to practice. Think about what you've heard. Make notes if possible. And see what occurs in your life during the week as you're prayerfully endeavoring to practice and be more mindful of some of the points we brought. All right? I wish you all a happy, blessed, spiritual growing week, and I look forward for us meeting next week. Hare Krishna.